international companies will need to determine whether Venezuela is somewhere that they think is worth investing. And for that, conditions need to be met.
In the last few minutes, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has been speaking on NBC. He said that what has happened in Venezuela is not a war. He said, we're at war against drug trafficking organizations. That's not a war against Venezuela. And he said the seizing of boats bringing drugs towards the United States would continue. And he was asked if he thinks that Delcy Rodriguez is the legitimate president. He said this is not about the legitimate president, as the US does not believe the regime in place is legitimate. But he says the government, the United States, is not recognizing the legitimacy of Venezuela's government, which will come from a period of transition and an election. Well, Venezuela is, of course, home to the world's largest oil reserves. And yesterday, President Trump made it very clear that oil was at the heart of his plan for regime change.
As everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust, for a long period of time. They were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Well, Jorge Leon is a senior vice president and head of geopolitical analysis at the industry consultancy Rystad Energy. Good afternoon to you, Jorge.
Good afternoon, Carol.
Really good to have you with us. Just explain to us why Venezuela's oil is so important.
Well, Venezuelan oil is particularly important because the country has the biggest reserves in the world, around 300 billion barrels. That is more than reserves from Saudi Arabia and the US together. So in terms of geology, the country is massive. Now, the problem that they face is that production, they only produce 1 million barrels per day. To give you a sense, that is roughly 0.8% of global supply. So despite the fact that the country has massive reserves, they only produce a tiny fraction of global supply.
And is that partly to do with the type of crude oil that is there?
Well, partly yes. Crude in Venezuela is very particular. It's heavy crude oil. Now that type of crude is very specific. It's more difficult to extract. It's most costly, more energy intensive to extract, and it's in high demand, particularly in the U.S. refining system. The U.S. refineries are configured to process heavy crude.
So when President Trump said yesterday that Venezuela has stolen American oil, is there any validity in that claim?
Well, it's very difficult to justify this statement. I don't think that Venezuela has stolen U.S. crude or U.S. companies. The industry was nationalized back in the year 2002 with President Chavez. And since then, the main operator has been PDVSA. But we shouldn't forget
when that happened, sorry to interrupt you, Jorge,
sure.
But when Venezuela nationalized its oil industry, a lot of those US firms who had invested and had big stakes in the industry lost out, didn't they?
Well, what Venezuela did was they bought all the assets from the international companies. So it's difficult to say whether that was at lost or no, but this was taken to international law and international tribunals. And it was determined that the price paid was the correct one. Let's say it was a fair price. So I don't think that it's fair to say that Venezuela kind of robbed the U.S. companies when the industry was nationalized.
So when President Trump talked there about the fact that you could now see a huge investment and huge amounts of oil coming out of Venezuela, and he talked about this being for the benefit of Venezuela, but presumably he also wants it to be for the benefit of the United States.
I mean, the issue that the type of crude that Venezuela produces is in high demand in the U.S. refining sector, it's really a clear indication. However, one of the things that I was really surprised is that after President Trump saying that international American companies will invest heavily in Venezuela, I mean, we haven't really heard anything from those American oil companies yet. I would have thought that right after President Trump's news conference, the companies such as Chevron, such as Exxon will just come out and say, yes, we're all on board. We're going to spend millions and millions of dollars. But we haven't really heard that. So that's a little bit surprising, I guess.
But could this work to the benefit of the Venezuelan people, or is this just about allowing US oil companies to get in there and make the most of Venezuela's resources?
I think there could be an equilibrium where, as in any oil producing country, where international companies go to the country, they extract, they transfer technology, and there is a profit sharing agreement. So this, in theory, could happen. We saw the same happen in Iraq, for example, right after the regime change, and the country reached an agreement with international oil companies so that the country benefited, of course, but also international oil companies will benefit. It has to be said that international companies will need to determine whether Venezuela is somewhere that they think is worth investing, and for that, conditions need to be met. And right now, the first thing that international companies will be looking at is whether there's a stable government. It's not so much about the money right now; it's about, is there a stable government? And right now, we're not sure. We're not sure who's running the country. Is it Delcy Rodriguez? Yesterday we thought that it was her, that she was running the country. Right now, it's not so clear. Where is the opposition right now? So I don't think that international oil companies will rush back into the country. That they will just take a very cautious approach before spending millions and millions of dollars in Venezuela.
Jorge Leon, Senior Vice President and Head of Geopolitical Analysis at the industry consultancy Rystad Energy. Really good to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Este es un taladro de reparación de pozos.